So you guys, we spoke last week, if you were here last week, about Hezekiah and this whole crazy story of the extension of 15 years to his life, how all that went down. We also saw and really kind of begin to talk about a little bit about the fact that these 15 years were not actually the greatest 15 years for Hezekiah. They were actually kind of a bad time for the people of Israel, but mainly for Hezekiah. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to see some interesting things that I think we can grow from. So, although we're past the numeric halfway point, right? 66 chapters in Isaiah. If you guys ever need to remember how many chapters there are, or how many books in the Bible there are, same as Isaiah. Isaiah is called a little Bible for that reason, right? And so Isaiah has 66 chapters. We're past that halfway point, but based on the subject matter, this is the halfway point. What do I mean by that? Well, chapter 1 through 38, really, we've been dealing with Assyria, haven't we? We've been looking at Assyria coming down. He kind of started way back in chapter 1, kind of talking about the fact that, man, this is what's going to happen. This is how it's all going to go down. Talking to the people of Judah. Then there's been a lot of chapters recently, more recently, that we've been talking about this idea of look, Assyria is going to come and it's going to try to do damage to us in Jerusalem, but it's not going to happen. God's going to take care of it. And we walked all the way through that happening. Well, guys, tonight, from chapter 39 to 66, really Isaiah shifts gears and he starts speaking about what's coming next, which is Babylon. And so tonight we're going to start seeing that. And listen, chapter 39 is a short one, but I think it's an important divider for the book of Isaiah. We're going to see how all of this got started with Babylon. And I wish I could say that it was like God's divine whatever, against a people that were doing their best to follow, but we know that's just not true. Like Hezekiah was a moron, and that's what we're going to see tonight. There's no nice way to say that. That's literally what he was in this moment, and you're going to see that if you've never read this chapter tonight. So let's dig in. Verse 1 in chapter 39 says this. At that time, at what time? At the time after Hezekiah just got done being healed, right? It says, Merodach Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent envoys, with letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he had heard that he had been sick and had recovered. I want to stop there. So we read here that there was this kind gesture from one leader to another. This Merodach Baladan, the king of Babylon, sent envoys in with a letter to give to Hezekiah and with a present. Who knows what the present was? Probably gold or something. But to celebrate the recovery from his sickness. And I got to say something, guys. This was more than just a nice visit to say, man, so glad you're feeling better. Think about this, you guys. Babylon, if you know where Babylon is, that whole area, that's all modern day Iraq. So this is quite a hike to send some people. You're not just being like, hey, man, how you doing? Right? This isn't just like President Biden getting in a plane and going over to see who's the king now in England? I can't think of his name. King Charles. I had King George in my head. I'm like, that's not right. That was way long ago. Yeah. King Charles, it wouldn't be like Biden just going over to see King Charles for no reason, right? Very similar principle. You're not just going to send a bunch of people this far, by the way, across enemy territory. Right? Assyria had Babylon at this point in history. They already owned them. But guess what? Babylon, this king, was well known for kind of being almost a militant. As a matter of fact, in the Assyrian writings that we have of this period of history, they basically were calling him a terrorist. He was a guy that was he was just a bad guy in their estimation. But to the Babylonians, he was a hero. He was like, man, this guy's amazing. That's why he's our king, right? So it depended on which side of the coin you're on in the writings that you read. But here's this guy, and he sends these envoys literally across enemy territory to come all the way to Jerusalem. It's a big deal. And it needs to get our head around this. Because if you were the leader, you would think that you'd be like, thanks for the gift. What are you here for? You know what I mean? But he sent them there. And it was more than just a nice visit to say, hey, man, glad you're feeling better. Remember, Babylon was in the midst of fighting off Assyrian control. Even though technically Assyria did own that area at this point, there was a lot of fighting, a lot of little militia warfare, or what am I trying to say? Guerrilla warfare, thank you. Tonight, my words, guys, Here's the deal. They have been fairly successful so far at kind of holding it off. This guerrilla warfare was working in their favor at this period of history. And so as they arrive in Jerusalem, it was most definitely a moment where one could look and say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend, which means what? You're not my friend, really, right? You're just the enemy of my enemy. And that was kind of where this was. This was another country that was coming with a friendly demeanor, that wanted to talk way more about the weather and how Hezekiah was feeling at the moment. They wanted to know, man, are we like, what could this mean for us as nations? How could we come together? How could we do these things? What could this look like? That is so painfully obvious. But let's keep reading. Verse 2. It apparently wasn't painfully obvious to Hezekiah, because it says, and Hezekiah welcomed them gladly. And he showed him his treasure house, the silver, the gold, the spices, the precious oil, his whole armory, all that was found in his storehouses. There was nothing in his house or in all his realm that Hezekiah did not show them. Then Isaiah the prophet came to King Hezekiah and said to him, What did these men say? And from where did they come to you? And Hezekiah said, they've come to me from a far country, from Babylon. Hezekiah welcomed them gladly, and I got to remind us here, obviously, Hezekiah was not a big fan of Assyria. And by the way, remember, just like we looked at in the last chapter, Assyria, Isaiah kind of did a thing. He took us the story all the way through to the end of Assyria, to the murder of Sennacherib, all that. Then we see this sickness that we know happened before the end of Assyria. We based that last chapter. We're still in that period. Assyria is still on the scene. They have not left in defeat away from Jerusalem yet, right? So there's still all this stuff happening. So yeah, Hezekiah wasn't a fan. And so of course he was happy to receive another strong ally against Assyria. But it also seemed clear that Hezekiah was impressed that Babylon took any notice of them. Think about the fact that at this point, Hezekiah was the king of a pretty tiny area. Assyria had come in and taken out the northern kingdom and then also wiped out a lot of the towns, right? We read about all that around them. So really, Jerusalem was it. Like, he was a king of a city, right? That's really what he had. He was not this king of this massive, wide kingdom. Babylon, by comparison, it would be like saying Dover compared to New York City. Right? Babylon was like New York City. It was a much bigger area that was being defended. Yes, the king was still under Assyrian rule, so to speak, the Babylonian king, but he wasn't. He was fighting back, right? And here is Hezekiah fighting back against Assyria as well. But we're talking, like I said, Dover compared to New York City. There's a massive difference. And so can you see why Hezekiah is like, dang, New York City took notice of little Dover. Wow, I'm special. They sent people this far to find out how I'm doing. Hezekiah was so enamored, thinking so highly of himself, that he immediately began to brag and show off everything they had. And he didn't stop at anything, right? It wasn't like he was like, look at all these spices I've got. You need a little cumin? I got it. You need a little cinnamon? Got it. I'm not going to show you what I actually have as far as armory, my warfighting capability, but I'll show you my spices. No, he didn't stop at anything. He showed everything. He's the worst poker player in the world. And so Isaiah, man, he hears about all this and he goes to Hezekiah. He's like, hey, man, where were these men from? What were they saying? And I stopped it where I did because do you notice he didn't really answer all the questions? What did they say? He didn't tell him. He just is like, oh, they came from Babylon, a far country. You guys, the questions that Isaiah asks are normal things that one should ask when an envoy from another country shows up at your door. Why? You should be suspicious. Why do you want to know what's going on in my life? How do you know what's going on in my life? You know, your CIA must be pretty good because you're pretty far away. How did you even know I was sick? There's a lot of questions that should have been asked that Hezekiah just didn't ask. So he answers the one part, but then that's it. So he tells them it's from Babylon. Let's keep reading. We're going to read one more verse here. Verse 4 says this. Again, this is Isaiah. Isaiah said, what have they seen in your house? And Hezekiah answered, they've seen all that's in my house. There's nothing in my storehouses that I did not show them. Can you literally see Isaiah? Here's a foreign nation at your borders. What they see, what they get to understand about who you are and your capability, all that matters. Even with a friendly nation, still matters, right? I don't think we're showing Canada all of our capabilities, even though Canada's not against it. You get my point? Like, that's just, you're stupid. Can you honestly see, like, as he says these things, can you just see, like, Isaiah being like, are you serious right now? It's like a total palm to the head moment. Hezekiah says it with confidence too, like, I showed him everything. Nothing was hidden. I could just see Isaiah being like, oy vey, you idiot. You know, I wonder if at that point Isaiah's like, God, why did you give him another 15 years? For real? Like, what was the purpose in that? Can I tell you guys of a similar situation that I put myself in? At the ripe old age of 18, when I knew everything. I had moved out of my little protected world of Perry County, Pennsylvania, where I knew a lot. Listen, I know how to pick up a snake. I know that you don't jump over a log whenever it's on the ground and it's rotting, because 10 to 1, there's something underneath there that might get you. Right? There's a lot of things I knew from living up in the woods. Like there's that type of smart that many city kids aren't. I was that smart. I was not city smart. I didn't have street smarts. I learned that in Philly the hard way in many times. So I lived in this little town outside of Philadelphia, this little suburb called Spring City, which actually has a very famous haunted Pembroke asylum. Anyway, that's there. But Spring City is like this ghetto kind of area outside of Philadelphia. And I lived in this apartment with a guy who was the lead singer of another band. And we had two ladies above us that were both rough around the edges. We have children here, so I won't say. Very rough around the edges. And there was a time that one of them came down to me to ask them to get across town, because neither of them had any transportation. They didn't have cars, and to pick something up. They're like, hey man, I need to get across town so I can pick something up. And so I ended up getting involved in a crack deal that I was unaware of in that moment. And so, yeah. But here's the thing. So I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't have even said that part. My apologies. Okay. I'm trying my best to keep this PG. But I was such an idiot, man. This lady, I invited her into my house. I'm like, hey, I got to put my shoes on. She's like, oh, hey, that's nice TV. That's a nice PlayStation. That's a nice this. And I was like, oh, yeah, man, come, like, check this out. Like, I got a really sweet stereo system in my room. And so I proceeded to get myself involved in this deal because I was that stupid. Later that month, I went home for Christmas to my family, which is like 3.5 hours away in central PA. And I come back, and I'm like in the house when I get back to the apartment. My roommate was also at home, right, in his place. He had a real bad habit of like taking our PlayStation and bringing it to wherever he wanted to, or my stereo system and just using it wherever. And it was an awesome stereo system. But anyway, he would do these things, right? So it was like I got home, and it was late at night because I had driven home later that night. And so I got home, I get in the house, I'm like, man, we must not have paid the heating bill because it's freezing in here. And so I slept that night. I woke up the next day, and I realized, hey, man, my stereo is gone. And so I got up, and I went out, and my roommate had gotten home sometime probably 3, 4 in the morning. I don't know when. He was sleeping on the couch because he's so tired. And I went out, and I'm like, Dave, dude, did you take my stereo? And he's like, no. And we ended up almost getting into a fist fight because I was accusing him of taking my stuff. And as he was bending, you got to understand too, this guy lifted weights. That's all he ever did. So he was like super strong. So he had me bent over the back of our console television where the PlayStation sat. And then my head was here. And I was like, hey, our PlayStation's gone. And that's when we realized we've been robbed. Everything was gone. Everything. The reason it was so cold in our house is because they busted out the window in our kitchen, and we had one of those like city fire escapes, right? That you can only get to from the floor above. where they lived because you couldn't reach the stairs, right? It would only go down if someone was on it to get down to the bottom. And I was on the second floor. So so we got robbed. And as I was studying for this, I was just like, man, I was like Hezekiah. I was a total idiot. So there's that. Not one of my prouder moments. You guys, I tell you to be raw. Here it is. Verse 5 says this. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord of hosts. So he's like, God is going to tell you something. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up till this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. You guys, I wonder if Isaiah said all this with a tone of disappointment. Like, I wonder if he's just looking at Hezekiah like, dude, you really blew it, man. Like, do you understand what you just did? The Lord says to Hezekiah, all that's in your house, and listen to me, all that your fathers have stored up. What was Hezekiah bragging about? Like, seriously, it almost smacks of this idea of, if you've ever known people, and I've had the privilege of having a few people that I've known throughout my life that came from a good bit of money. And thankfully, when I met them, they were really humble about it. Like, they realized, like, dang, I am a blessed person. I've got a ton of money, right? Like, from my family and stuff. But you always see on the news, or you hear on different things, or maybe some of you guys have met people like this that, like, don't realize that they didn't actually do anything. They're just lucky. They just got born into the right family, and they could just as easily have been born in Africa in a third world country living in a mud hut. But they're too stupid to realize that. That's kind of what Hezekiah is doing. He's out here bragging like, yo, look, I'm a son of David. Like, you know what I mean? Not literally, but I'm like, he's in my line. Like, dude, this whole thing has been built up through years and years and years and has pretty much nothing to do with me. That would have been a more honest response. But he wasn't. He was bragging about, look at what I got. You got nothing. You brought nothing to the table. You guys, all that we have has been given to us. Can I tell you that? He says, all that's in your house that your fathers have stored up. Hezekiah made this big mistake of believing a lie. You guys, God gives us everything. And listen, hear me on this. It makes me think of my mom's refinished Hoosier cabinet that we have in our house. If you guys don't know what a Hoosier cabinet is, it's a very Americana piece of furniture. It was like an all-in-one kitchen thing, man. You can like pull the thing. Anyway, really cool thing that my mom has cherished. And guess what? Before her, it was somebody else's. And when she passed, they came to my wife and I. And so now we have it in our kitchen. And it's a big, awesome piece of furniture that I cherish because it was my mom's, but I also cherish it because there's not many of them around really anymore. They're just getting few and far between. But the point I'm making is that I think of that thing, and it's not, I'm never going to look at you guys and be like, look what I got. I slaved long and hard back in the early 30s when this was made to purchase it. No, it was a hand-me-down. You get my point? Like, that's the way Hezekiah should have been. Like, dude, I'm blessed. But he wasn't. Listen, even if you save your own money and buy something, can I tell you something? God gave you the gift of 2 arms and 2 legs and air in your lungs to go earn the money. Like, there's nothing that we do. And I think that smacks a little bit against the American culture, doesn't it? Because we're like, man, we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And we earn our way. And we do all these things. And that's how everybody here talks when they're talking about America. No. But it's this thing that I feel like, listen, don't get me wrong, hard work is hard work. And there's some great things that we can all say, man, yeah, I got to buy this cool, we have a convertible. We love our little convertible. It's fun. And it was used. Somebody else owned it before us. But it's this thing and it's great. But I'm not going to go brag about it and be like, look what I got. It's just a thing. And it can go away tomorrow, or it can be given away tomorrow, or it can do a lot of things. And God might be like, you know what? You have fun in that, but now it's not yours because you need to give it to so-and-so because they need it more. Right? Like, I want to always hold everything like that. And I feel like here we see Hezekiah, man, a guy, and I need us to hear this, a guy that walked faithfully with the Lord That's the key that I'm trying to get us across here. Acting like an idiot. Walking in self-centered, self-focused garbage. So what's that tell us? It means we're all capable of walking in it too.
Amen.
How arrogant of Hezekiah. To act like all this wealth, all this abundance wasn't a gift of God. Wasn't because of his godly family, this line of David. Man, he was blessed to be born into that. Isaiah continues, he's like, man, all the stuff that you just got done bragging about, it's all going to Babylon. None of it's going to be yours anyway. None of it's going to be left behind. So let's keep reading. Verse 7, it says this. Isaiah continues, he says, and some of your own sons who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Isaiah doesn't just stop at possessions. He goes on to talk about the fact that Hezekiah is going to have sons. We know that in these last 15 years, Hezekiah had Manasseh, which is a horrific king. Most likely, church history tells us Manasseh, his own son, is the one that sawed Isaiah in half, starting at the bottom and working his way up. So it was the most suffering possible. And that's what's spoken about in Hebrews. It's somewhere cut in half. You guys, Manasseh was a horrible person. And the reality is this happened in this last 15 years, but we see not just him, there's other people in this line that he's saying, man, some of your own sons who come from you are going to be taken away. They're going to be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Listen to what he's saying. You have more children to have, but those children are going to have the freedom to have children removed from them. We all know what a eunuch is, right? I'm not going to go any further. Do you understand what he's trying to say? He's like, look at what you just did. Now, granted, we know God has a plan, and we've already kind of seen little glimmerings in Isaiah that Babylon was going to come in and do something, right? We know that there was some prophetic words already given about Babylon, but here it's getting way more. I mean, this is like kind of when Isaiah's like, like God's made it abundantly clear. There's no hiding behind this. This is absolute fact. This is what's coming. By the way, this is still super prophetic, though, because it was still going to be another 100-ish years before it actually happens. It's 11 or 12-year process for Babylon when they lay siege initially to the right. And we kind of already went through Ezekiel. For those of you guys that remember that, Ezekiel got sent away in one of those waves. Daniel obviously got sent away in one of those waves. There's a lot going on. Jeremiah is still in Jerusalem. There's a lot of stuff happening in all this season, but we're still pretty far away from that. There's some debate on how long, 70 years, 80 years, 100 years. It's somewhere, it's a while. It's not right away. Because again, remember, Babylon was not the big powerhouse at this point. They were still pretty tiny. They were New York City. But he's saying, man, your kids are going to be eunuchs. They're going to be robbed of all this freedom. And how gut-wrenching of a pronouncement from God is this? Hezekiah, you have screwed up so royally that you let people-pleasing be your aim instead of pleasing me. You just wanted this new group of leaders to really know how cool you were, to know that you were really something. It's little Dover, New Hampshire compared to New York City, but we got cool stuff too. You guys, we know how all this went down historically. Let's flip over to 2 Kings chapter 24. Again, remember, I'm talking about now a time that is in advance of where we're at here in Isaiah. We're talking a big chunk of time. But I kind of want to just look at this because I want us to see just what a gut-wrenching thing this turned out to be. 2 Kings chapter 24, it's kind of near the very end. It's right before 1 Chronicles. Verse 10 is where I want to start. It says this. It says, at that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, gave himself up to the king of Babylon, himself and his mother and his servants and his officials and his palace officials. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign and carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of the Lord, which Solomon, king of Israel, had made, as the Lord had foretold. He carried away all Jerusalem and all the officials and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. None remained except the poorest people of the land. And then look down, just a little down from there, or in the next chapter, chapter 25, you guys. I want to start in verse 8. This is, again, years later, we see. Well, and just to kind of finish the story, so Nebuchadnezzar initially he takes away the king, but he appoints this guy and he renames him Zedekiah, right? Who was kind of the uncle. He was 21 years old when he took over. This guy that he renamed Zedekiah. And in chapter 25, verse 8, we see this. In the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, that was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. That guy's name, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the bodyguard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every great house he burned down, and all the army of the Chaldeans, that's about the Babylonians, right? The same, just a different name, who were with the captain of the guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. And the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who had deserted to the king of Babylon, together with the rest of the multitude, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. And the pillars of bronze that were in the house of the Lord, and the stands and the bronze sea that were in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans broke into pieces and carried the bronze to Babylon. And they took away the pots and the shovels and the snuffers and the dishes of incense and all the vessels of bronze used in the temple service. The fire pans also and the bowls that were of gold, the captain of the guard took away as gold, and what was of silver as silver. And for the 2 pillars, the one sea and the stand that Solomon had made for the house of the Lord, the bronze of all those vessels was beyond weight. It was so heavy. The height of one pillar was 18 cubits, and on it was a capital of bronze. The height of the capital was 3 cubits, a latticework and pomegranates, all of bronze, were all around the capital. And the second pillar had the same with the latticework. So what are we hearing? The first time Nebuchadnezzar came through, he took all the obvious stuff, all the massive amounts of gold, all the king's stuff, right? He comes back later, like 11 years later, and they're like, yeah, we didn't pick up all that bronze. Let's get that too. They just took everything. Everything. And this, guys, in the process of this, we know Daniel went. And guys, by the way, many scholars believe Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, all eunuchs. They were all made eunuchs. And I don't think that's very difficult to believe. Think about the fact that usually as a king, you didn't put people in positions where they were going to be around your wives at all if you had the capability to create progeny. Do you get it? So I'm like, it's not that difficult to believe. Now, maybe we'll get to heaven, and maybe Daniel will be like, I'm fine. I don't know what you're talking about. maybe it's wrong, but I don't think it's that impossible to believe it. And guess what? Daniel was in this line. You guys, do you understand what is being said here? Flip back over me to Isaiah. Isaiah is dropping a massive bomb. If Hezekiah wasn't that bummed out about the fact that he was going to lose all the stuff he just bragged about, one would hope that he would be bummed out about the fact that, oh my gosh, my kids are going to have to suffer. Well, let's read and see just how broken up he was. Verse 8. It says, Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good. For he thought, there will be peace and security in my days. What a loser. Like, wow. Good job, Dad. Hezekiah, man, he has some pretty telling words here, doesn't he? Instead of being repentant, instead of like falling on his face before the Lord, right? It makes me think of David when he got told by the prophet Nathan that he had screwed up, right? You remember the whole story about the sheep and like, man, I'm going to go find that guy that took the one sheep from that poor man and did it even though he had a whole flock of sheep. And he's like, you are the man. Remember that? Yeah. And what did David do? He wasn't like, whoa, whew, I'm not going to kill myself. I'm good. No, David was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? He was broken. He was repentant. He was like, I am that man. It's horrible. No, Hezekiah didn't do any of this, guys. He wasn't repentant. He wasn't broken. He wasn't distraught. He's like, man, that's a good word. At least I'm not going to be affected. Wow. Hezekiah showed his ugly, selfish side in this moment. And again, I'm going to remind us, Hezekiah was a godly king. And I do believe he truly loved the Lord. So what am I trying to say, church? We are not that far. We're one thought or one train of thought away from being just like that in the way we live. How do we avoid it? Stay focused on the Lord. How else? Be real before your brothers and sisters in the Lord. And Lord willing, as a church, we're loving each other enough to be like, yo, that's selfish, man. And call that garbage out. None of us here are kings. We have nothing to worry about. That makes sense? Nobody's here's royalty. Nobody's going to be like, you're going to jail for what you just said to me. No, nobody can do that. Feel free to love each other enough to speak the truth. I'm not saying be mean. And I'm also not saying not to be gracious. What I'm saying is, man, if you see something in me, I would hope and pray you guys would love me enough to come talk to me about it. And people do. Steve does every day. Steve's like, by the way, jerk. No. But I do that with you guys. You know, if I see something or if I hear something, man, listen, and it doesn't mean I'm always right about it, but I would rather call something out and be like, I don't know if I agree with that, or I think that might be a wrong heart there, and find out that I'm wrong and know that at least I'm trying to walk together with you, than to just avoid it and be like, oh, keep going the way you're going. I don't think it's very good, but I'm not going to say anything. Man, that is the least loving thing we can do, and that's exactly what the world wants us to do nowadays, doesn't it? Just accept everybody for who they are. I'm not going to. I'll accept that we're all a bunch of sinful people, but I'm always going to Christians. I'm always going to call us to a higher standard, right. Yeah. Just as I hope you do to me. Because that's the goal. That's the heart, right? To be more like Jesus today than we were yesterday. Yeah. Man. You guys, we see here, yes, he did love God, Hezekiah did, but he was also still a very screwed up human. And I feel like one thing that should do is give us some peace. We're not alone. Listen, even for those of us that have been walking with the Lord a good while, can I tell you, we can rest in his grace, and his grace is just as efficacious, it's just as valuable as it was the very first day you received it from Jesus. But here Hezekiah had been given 15 years extra. And overall, what do we see? He didn't use it to glorify God very well. Instead, he reveled in his own self-importance, his own wealth, his own power for the remaining years of his life. Truth is, you guys, and this is the thing I want to ask us all here tonight. What are we going to do? What are we doing with the time we have left on earth? Because we don't know. You might have 15 years and you don't know it. You might have tonight. God help you, but maybe you have another like 30 or 40. Right? And why do I say that? Because, man, if this world's as crazy as it is now, what's it going to be like in 30 to 40 years? Right? But you guys, what's our focus, man? Where is the aim of our lives? I think it's an important question to ask. And I think if we look at Hezekiah's life, if we look at these last 15 years, it's like, wow, man, you blew it pretty bad. And it wasn't just this one thing. Can't you see that? His own thoughts kind of give him away a little bit. Like in these last 15 years, he's like, I'm good. I know my days are numbered, but man, I don't really care because look, I got everything I want. And now you're telling me that I'm not going to have to worry about it? Like, sweet. I'll just go like, the duck and DuckTales and swim around in my money, right? Scrooge McDuck, yes. David Guzik had this to say about this whole time as a whole for King Hezekiah and the extra time he had been given. He said this: time or age doesn't necessarily make us any better. Consider the time does nothing but pass away. We sometimes say time will tell, or time will heal, or time will bring out this potential in me. But time does nothing of the sort. Time will only come and go. It is only how we use time that matters. And then he closes here and he says, Hezekiah didn't make good use of the extra time the Lord gave him. Guys, would you guys join me tonight? Here's the deal. I want us to break up into groups of no more than 4. And what I want to do is this. I want us to each pray over another person in your group. I don't want talking. Let me rephrase that. I want praying. I don't want conversation. How about that? You're like, how are we going to talk and pray at the same time? Or not talk and pray. I want us to pray over another person in your group. And listen, we don't need to know what that means. Does that make sense? The Lord knows. And so I want us to beseech God, to ask God to show that person you're praying for, what is the plan for their life? That God would show that person what is the plan for their life, and that God would then give them the wisdom and the strength to walk it out wisely. To use the time wisely. And to bring honor and glory to Jesus by their lives. Guys, do you guys think you can do that? So here's the deal. We're going to get into groups of 4. Doesn't have to take forever. We can get out of here a little early if you guys want. But the main point I want to do is I want you to just, whoever's next to you, pray for them. Ask God, Lord, would you help this person to know the thing that you've got for them in their remaining years? And God, would you give them the strength and the wisdom to walk it out for your glory? Let's do it.